we begin this second session of the 21st Legislature, let us first memorialize former members of this House who have died since we last were in session. Robin Daniel Jorgensen, the member for Pembina, 1944 to 1967. Percy Alexander McKelvey, the member for Ponoka, 1940 to 1944. John Archibald Mills, the member for Lac St. Anne, from 1955 to 1959. Ronald Joseph Teslin, member for Lac La Biche McMurray, 1975 to 1979. And Joseph Henry Unwin, the member for Edson, 1934 to 1940. Rest eternal grant unto them, O Lord, and let light perpetual shine upon them. Amen. Father, on this day of a new beginning, we ask for your guidance in the responsibility we have undertaken and your help in fulfilling our duties. As members of this Legislative Assembly, may we faithfully serve all Albertans, and in serving them, serve you. Amen.
Introduction of visitors, presenting petitions, reading and receiving petitions, presenting reports by standing and special committees, notices of motions, introduction of bills, tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table certain returns that have to do with the annual Premier's Conference in August in Edmonton, the communiques that were prepared as a result of that conference. I'd also like to table the Government of Alberta's opening statement in the First Minister's Conference in Vancouver, and the document entitled Canada's Energy Future, Action Today for a Secure Tomorrow, which was tabled also at the First Minister's Conference.
Mr. Speaker, I am tabling the annual report of the Crimes Compensation Board for the period ending March 31st, 1986, and the annual review for 1984 of the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner.
Introduction of special guests.
Mr. Speaker, I have the pleasure of introducing 30 students to the Assembly from the Fultonvale School in grades 4 through 9. They're accompanied by their teachers and some parents from the Fultonvale School, and I would ask the Chamber to extend their traditional warm welcome to these students. They are in the Members Gallery, sir. Please.
I take great pleasure in introducing to you and through you to the members of the Assembly 40 grade 6 students from the Fort Saskatchewan Elementary School. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Alexandric, who has been bringing young people to this legislature for many years, and Mrs. Ben, who is also one of their teachers, and one of their parents, Mrs. Lawrence, and their bus driver, Eric Van Camp, who has been bringing students to this school for at least 15 years. They are standing in the public gallery, and I'd like the members of the Assembly to give them the traditional welcome.
It is a sincere privilege for me to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly 30 grade 8 students from Dr. Egbert Community School in my constituency of Calgary-Montrose. The students are accompanied by their community school coordinator, Del James, along with Colleen Roberts, Jean Johnson, and Marie Nault. I would ask them all to rise and receive the warm welcome of the Legislative Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce 5 students who are here at our invitation in the celebration of Education Week, and I would ask them to stand as I read out their names. First is Rashid Hossein from the J. Percy Page Composite High School in Edmonton, Mr. Greg Heyer of the Paul Kane High School in St. Albert, Lynette McNamara of the H.A. Costache School in Smoky Lake, Jane Rowe of St. Francis High School in Calgary, and Scott Seipert of Foothills Composite High School in Okotoks. But I'd ask them all to stand as a group, please, and be recognized by this Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to draw to the attention of the Assembly the presence in the members' gallery of Margaret Leahy, the chairperson of the Alberta Advisory Committee on Women's Issues, and Dr. Sheila Wynne, the Executive Director of the Women's Secretariat. I ask them both to stand and receive the welcome of the Assembly.
Honourable members, it is my pleasure on behalf of all of us to welcome to the Assembly the families of some of the deceased members of former members of this Assembly. First, I would introduce to you Mr. Gino Teslin and other members of Ron Teslin's family. And also Mrs. Stella Unwin and members of her family. And one other set of introductions are by way of a thank you. Members will have noticed 1 or 2 changes to the chamber. And in this regard, I would first have us recognize the architect for the project, Mr. Brian Wolfenden. And with very special thanks to representatives of the Department of Public Works, Supply and Services, and if those 3 gentlemen would stand, I would greatly appreciate it.
Ministerial statements.
Mr. Speaker, today marks the last day of Education Week 1987 in Alberta, and the first opportunity that I've had in the legislature to speak officially to the celebration. I had the privilege to introduce earlier 5 young people who represent what is excellent in our school system in Alberta. In the speech from the throne yesterday, Her Honor highlighted this government's key emphasis on quality education as one of its leading priorities. That emphasis has not changed during the past decade and a half, as Albertans have built an education system modeled on strength, creativity, partnerships, and commitment. Clearly, there is no more important function that we can fulfill as a society in general, and as a province in particular, than the foundation which only a good education can provide our young people. Education Week is one special week out of many during the school year when we can reflect positively as Albertans on the excellence in our school system, which we too often take for granted. It also provides an opportunity to pay special recognition to those who are involved in education throughout the province, our teachers, our trustees, and most important, our students. The week began in Calgary, where I invited Nadine Thomas, the president of the Alberta Teachers Association, and Elaine Jones, president of the Alberta School Trustees Association, to join me in the official kickoff ceremony at the Calgary Olympic Centre. There, we received copies of the new Olympic curriculum kits, which have been distributed to these 1,700 schools around the province to heighten all students' awareness of the international focus and excitement which the Winter Olympics will provide in just 11 months from now. Mr. Speaker, the theme of Education Week this year is Learning for Life. It's about recognizing that learning is a lifelong process which never stops. It's about striving for excellence in everything we do, whether it's teaching or learning. It's about deciding what are the critical and essential components of a good basic education. It's about making improvements in the way students are taught in order to ensure that they are learning in the most effective way. And it's about preparing our young people with the skills, the creativity, the knowledge, and the desire to face the challenges of the 21st century. Schools across this province have joined in the celebration of Education Week in Alberta through special projects, mini-conferences, science fairs, and general classroom discussion. I invite all members of the Legislative Assembly to join in the celebration.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it does take a government with a lot of gall to talk about Education Week when we're in the process of doing everything we can to dismantle education in the province. Mr. Speaker, nobody would disagree with the ministerial statement. I would compliment the minister for reading it well, and the rhetoric is nice, but I point out rhetoric is cheap. I remind that we're talking about cutting back 3%. With institutional inflation means it's probably roughly 7%. We're talking about cuts in community schools, and we well know they were here at the legislature cutting by 50%. And I can tell the minister what that means in my own riding for an inner-city school like Norwood School and Alex Taylor schools and people like that. If we really believe in this rhetoric, we would not be doing this at this particular time. Mr. Speaker, I expect that we'll have to wait to the budget to see how bad it is. But I would say to this Minister of Education, if she honestly believes in this statement, she'll be talking to her colleague, the provincial treasurer, and turning back these regressive cuts in education so that we can indeed believe in her statements. And I hope she'll do that.
Mr. Speaker, March 8th is International Women's Day, a significant event for women worldwide dating back to 1910. It is a day in which efforts to improve the position of women, especially in the area of employment, are acknowledged. Today, in honor of International Women's Day, I am pleased to table a new publication entitled Women in Alberta, which highlights some of the programs and activities of the Government of Alberta which are of special significance to women. This booklet outlines the achievements made in enhancing the position of women and symbolizes the government's ongoing commitment to ensure that women have the opportunity for full and equal participation in all aspects of Alberta life. While it is evident that much progress has been made, other steps are yet to be taken. The government is committed to building on the momentum already developed for the benefit of all of its citizens, whether in the home, in the workplace, or in the community. Later in this legislative session, I will table new initiatives taken by several departments as committed to in the Premier's 1986 address to the First Minister's Conference.
I rise again to reply to the ministerial announcement. Again, who could disagree with the rhetoric in this particular announcement? I'm sure all the women in Alberta will be overjoyed to know that they'll have a new publication titled Women in Alberta. But I expect, Mr. Speaker, that they would like some action from the legislature dealing with things like pay equity, dealing with things like affirmative action in the public service, dealing with poverty in older women, dealing with battered women's shelters, dealing with the crisis line. I would think that the announcement from the minister in those areas would go a long way to satisfying women, but I doubt that they'll be too satisfied with the new publication. But again, maybe hope springs to turn and we'll see something worthwhile in the rest of the legislature. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
oral question period.
Honourable members, briefly, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you all to the second session of the 21st Legislature. While it is not my intention to review the practices relating to question period and ministerial statements, I do wish to briefly reiterate a few points of procedure which may help proceedings along. I have a statement for distribution which outlines the procedures for question period and ministerial statements which were in effect in 1986 and which will be in effect as we begin this session, and that is the result of a consensus developed by meeting with the House leaders of all parties. One further word with respect to question period. I'm sure you won't be surprised that it has to deal with the issue of supplementary questions. I am sure all members are aware of the various restrictions on asking questions in the Assembly, but would especially like members to take note of Beauchene Section 357, subsection 1, where it refers to citation 171, which is, quote, "The purpose of a question is to obtain information and not to supply it to the House," end of quote. Lengthy preambles or preambles for a supplementary question would seem to fall into that category. I would also like to draw members' attention to Beauchene Section 712, subsection 1, where it states, and I quote, "The first reading of a bill is purely a formal stage as it is decided without debate or amendment." And the Chair interprets this to mean that one or two sentences should provide members on all sides of the House ample opportunity to introduce a bill. Each one of us is fully aware that we are elected members seeking to serve our constituents to the best of our abilities. At times we may disagree, but indeed throughout the thrust and parry of debate, all members are indeed equal, and the Chair will do the utmost in its power to treat you all as equals, and certainly you will be respected as equals. Thank you. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to direct the first question to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, since the Premier took office a year ago, 30,000 more Albertans are officially unemployed, 15,000 more collecting welfare, and in January, Alberta suffered the greatest increase in unemployment among Canadian provinces. My question to the Premier, does the Premier agree that this performance is unacceptable, and has he set a specific goal of job creation in the next year?
Mr. Speaker, as all members of the House know, that we do have an unacceptably high level of unemployment in the province of Alberta. And we are working very hard to do everything possible to reduce that level. Last year's budget, still in existence till the end of March, had the largest job creation effort in the history of Alberta and went a long way Mr. Speaker, to help the unemployed in this province. The massive programs for energy, the massive programs for agriculture, the efforts in diversification into tourism, the creation of a new Department of Tourism, a new Department of Forestry, a new Department of Research and Technology. All of those efforts, Mr. Speaker, have gone a long way to reducing the impact of international events that have brought an unacceptably high level of unemployment in Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, I would remind him that those things are not working. There's 30,000 more unemployed. Instead of reiterating the failures of the past, could the Premier tell us why the throne speech offered only a continuation of the failed policies of the past? Is there anything new coming in this legislative session that we can tell the unemployed?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition starts off with a false premise. Those programs are working. They're working dramatically all over this province. You only have to drive through Alberta these days and you see those programs working. You see it in construction. You see it in highway construction. And as a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, we've been fortunate with the type of winter that we've had. There's been a lot of work able to be done that normally would have had to wait and start again in the spring. So, Mr. Speaker, in fact, there was a tremendous impact on employment levels through the programs which the government has had in the past, and I think as they go through the session, Mr. Speaker, we will see that there are many new ones that will help the unemployed in every way possible.
Mr. Speaker, that answer is unacceptable. And my question is to the Premier. The only industry that is going up is patronage. And my question to the Premier, will the Premier now start putting the needs of unemployed Albertans ahead of good Conservatives in this province?
Mr. Speaker, the needs of unemployed Albertans are first in the province's minds at all times. And that is why the government has expended so many dollars and so many programs to help them. We will continue to do that, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, question to the Premier. We spent a lot of money, wasted a lot of money. Nobody's denying that. My question is, will the Premier give the unemployed just a little glimmer of hope and agree to the suggestion of my colleague from Edmonton Belmont that we set up a select standing committee to deal specifically with unemployment and job creation?
Mr. Speaker, I can't imagine a more foolish effort.
Leader of the Liberal Party, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad the Premier enjoyed his winter. Many of the unemployed had to stay here. Has the Premier made any study of what industries are job-intensive and what are capital-intensive in order to aid those that will create the most jobs per taxpayer dollar spent?
Good question.
Mr. Speaker, there has obviously been work done in that regard, but we're not studying the matter, Mr. Speaker. We're doing something about it.
The representative party. Second main question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back to the Premier. This Wednesday, the Premier is probably aware, the federal finance minister told the Commons Finance Committee that Western Canadians are, and I quote, prisoners of market forces which Ottawa cannot control. And he noted that 96% of the new jobs in Canada last year were created in Ontario. My question to the Premier is, in view of those statements, why did the Premier throw away the opportunity to meet with Mr. Wilson in late February to explain that there are, in fact, many things that the federal authorities could do to spur job creation here in this province?
Mr. Speaker, over the course of the last year, members of the government have met with cabinet ministers, the federal government. I've met with other premiers, the Prime Minister. We've met with senators. We've met with many people with regards to the needs of Alberta and Western Canada. And, Mr. Speaker, to have another meeting with Mr. Wilson didn't seem to me to be an important follow-up for me at this time. I believe Mr. Wilson should meet with Alberta's Treasurer and also with Alberta's Minister of Energy. And I hope that in a meeting like that, they can work out some new understanding for Mr. Wilson so that further changes in budgets or tax reform will reflect the needs of Alberta and Western Canada.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in view of the Premier's answer, I thought he was the Premier rather than the Treasurer, but maybe they've changed roles. But my question is, he admits that the strategy has failed totally because of those statements. Beyond the strategy now of telling people to vote Tory in the province, what new strategy has the Premier devised to deal with his colleagues in Ottawa that will make him more effective?
Mr. Speaker, there's been a long record in the House of the government having difficulties getting the attention and action out of Central Canada, but we're going to continue to work at it. We will do it on a reasonable basis and also in a politically pressure type of action, Mr. Speaker, which I think will work. We have arranged a meeting with our provincial treasurer and our Minister of Energy with Mr. Wilson. That meeting will be held this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure that Mr. Wilson will get the message.
Mr. Speaker, rather than worrying about protocol of his office, the Premier should be taking the opportunity to explain it. The statements were made on Wednesday, and the Premier says that he's not happy with the performance of his party in Ottawa, but yet he still says he supports them in any case. My question is that not a pretty silly negotiating position that you're going to support them no matter what they do to you? Can the Premier explain that?
Far better than we are.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my comments were to be clear that the present government has not responded as we would want in as many ways as we would want. But they are so much better than the mess we had down there when it was a liberal government, sometimes in a minority, but even when they're in a majority, supported by the NDP, so that they could somehow try and take over control of Alberta's resources and rape this province. And we hope we never see that again. And having been...
Perhaps the honourable member would like to leave some more of the answer for more of a question on the supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I enjoyed the Premier's sense of humor today. My question is, to be very specific, it's my understanding that Mr. Mazikowski is preparing a new federal paper on Western diversification. My question specifically to the Premier is, what representation has the Premier made to the Deputy Minister on this? And if he has made any, will he table it in this Legislative Assembly?
One sentence, ask the Prime
Deputy Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I've had numerous discussions with the Deputy Prime Minister, so have other members of our government. Those discussions will continue. I have arranged a meeting with him as well when I travel to Ottawa for the First Minister's meeting on trade. I believe that these various initiatives by our government will cause this Western diversification program of the federal governments to include within it measures that will help all of Western Canada and Alberta specifically.
Leader of the Liberal Party, supplementary question.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary to the Premier. In view of the fact that the federal Tories took away our base price for oil, they took away the right to regulate our natural gas prices, they've taken away any tax incentives for the oil industry, in view of the fact that they think they have a bunch of provincial pussycats for Tories, what do you think they're going to take away next?
Really? Did you work 6 months on that?
Mr. Speaker, there's no question that there have been some problems with the federal government's initiatives which relate to Alberta. I've said that publicly, and other members of our government have. But I want to repeat, Mr. Speaker, they're so much better than that disgraceful group that were down there. And now to have them, having been booted out of Ottawa, come to Alberta and say, we will help. We will help the energy industry. It is the biggest joke I've ever heard in my life.
Please, honourable members, no cat calls whether you're pussycats or not. Leader of the Representative Party.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Premier. The federal budget of Mr. Wilson rather ignored the oil and gas industry. Could the Premier indicate what initiative is being requested by Alberta of Mr. Wilson to improve the oil and gas industry for us here in this province and as Canada as well?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member will recall that the other major extractive industry in this country, the mining industry, has certain tax incentives and depletion and flow-through shares that have allowed it to continue to grow quite strongly under current economic conditions. One of the major requests that we made of the federal government is that our energy industry be treated in the same way from a tax point of view. That did not come through in the budget. We do know that tax reform will be coming. Our ministers will be meeting with Mr. Wilson, and rather than talk about their discussions in advance, I think it would be preferable if one or both of the ministers discuss the matter on Monday, having had their meeting.
Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, this question is for the Minister of Education. The 3% cuts to people-oriented services announced by the government has left many people in the education, health, and social services sectors worried about their jobs, let alone the quality of services Albertans may end up receiving in these important areas. The field of education, which is labor-intensive and democratically spread, the jobs democratically spread, school boards will have to do with 10% less given the 3% cut and the 4% inflation, plus the 50% slash, of course, in community schools. Take it easy, fellas. It's just Friday morning. You got to have a lot of energy yet to keep this out. Now, while the unemployment in the province remains at over 10%, how many teachers, teacher aides, and support staff are expected to join the ranks of unemployed because of these cuts?
I guess the honourable leader would have to address that question to school boards across this province, Mr. Speaker.
Oh. What a cop-out. Second question. That was a comment, Mr. Speaker. How certain is the minister that school boards will be able to absorb the cuts without laying off teachers, bus drivers, support staff, and the like, since the school boards already have had to lay off 900 people in the province, given the suspension of the intern program alone?
Mr. Speaker, I have every confidence that school boards in this province are addressing what is the most important thing in their delivery system, and that is the delivery of quality education. I have every confidence as well that they will make the most effective decisions that they can.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary this time to the Premier. Obviously, Ottawa's at fault for oil. It's the school boards at fault for education. Maybe the Premier could tell me if he feels that school boards can absorb the 10% cuts. Is it a message to Albertans that they can also settle for 10% less in quality education? Where is the celebration for Education Week?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, there are not 10% cuts, and the member would not, I'm sure, want to spread false information in the legislature. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, the reductions in school grants do not take place until September the 1st. And that was announced by the Minister of Education so that school boards could plan. And that planning is what they're doing right now. And we'd anticipate, Mr. Speaker, that school boards will fulfill their responsibility and provide quality education, because in Alberta, in our education system, advanced education and public school education, the people in education receive more dollars per capita than any province in Canada. More dollars per capita than any province in Canada.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, that's the trouble with his concept of measurement. The more he spends, it's supposed to be better. It's how you spend that's important. What percentage of teachers? Somebody's fed him raw meat this morning, Mr. Speaker. Let them have breakfast next time, Mr. Speaker. What percentage of the teachers joining the ranks of unemployed would the Premier find acceptable?
Mr. Speaker, the education system is not an employment program. The education system is to provide quality education to the children and students of Alberta. The honourable member, though, in his preliminary comments, is finally starting to understand. Throwing money, dollars after dollars after dollars at the system is not the answer. It's the efficiency and providing the quality education in the most efficient way. And that's what we're asking the school boards to do. And different from the honourable member, the school boards are fulfilling their responsibility and working out those plans now.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister of Education. Could the Minister indicate whether any flexibility has been built into the 3% cut, such as flexibility for small rural schools of Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, that's an important question, and I don't believe that the budget proposals which will come before the legislature should be described as an across-the-board reduction plan. In fact, there are differences within that budget plan which reflect the priority of the different kinds of grants. One of the ones to which the honourable member is referring is, of course, the equity grant, which recognizes the differing fiscal capacity amongst school boards in the province. And that is the one portion of the budget proposals which are in my part of my budget, which will be increased recommended for increase in the 87-88 fiscal year.
Supplementary, Edmonton Highlands.
To the Premier, supplementary question. Can the Premier confirm that in light of the announced budget cuts in education and advanced education, which are resulting or will result in a direct brain drain of this province, that the new PR motto of this government will be, will the last person leaving Alberta please turn out the lights?
Mr. Speaker, the people of Alberta recognize that when the government had lots of funds were provided to the people of Alberta in many programs. But they are all pulling together now, and they realize there aren't that many dollars, and they are going to work with the reduced dollars, and they're going to be able to make this province just as strong and growing in the future as it has been in the past. And it's only the kind of view expressed by the NDP is the kind of view that will hurt this province, because the lights the lights may start to go out in this province, but it'll only be if you ever had an NDP government.
Answers should not provoke debate.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mike.
Expert on Beauchene in the House.
Right. Yes, the leader of the Liberal Party has been studying over the summer. It's nice to see. The holiday does a lot for a person.
I stay here.
Even if they can't afford it. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the... My question is to the Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs, and it's my concern about the Alberta's fair place in Confederation and getting a fair deal in Canada. And it's with regards to the Department of Regional Industrial Expansion and the grants that are available to Alberta. At present, only 2 zones in Alberta qualify for the Tier 2 grants, as I understand it. My question to the Minister is, has the Minister made representation to the Honourable Michelle Cote, the Federal Minister responsible for DRE, to assure Albertans they're going to get a fair treatment in terms of those grants, and will also get more treatment and have more availability and access to those grants in light of the economic downturn in the province of Alberta, which I feel at this time qualifies us for a better deal from Ottawa?
Mr. Speaker, that's a very important question and has been the subject of representations by our government to the federal government. Unfortunately, they have not yet recognized the fact that Alberta has moved into an economic downturn and made the appropriate adjustments to the IRDP grants structure. We have made representations to Mr. Cote, and also it's important to note that, and this was referred to earlier by the Premier, that in representations to Mr. Mazankowski relative to the preparation of a Western Initiatives program, that we have made specific representations to Mr. Mazankowski and those a group of members of Parliament and Cabinet who are working with him in preparation of that document. So that is one of the representations that has gone forward to the federal government.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister. As of July the 1st, 1987, a reclassification all across Canada can occur in terms of the legislation. Would it be the intent of the Minister to make representation to have Alberta classified as, in terms of all of its zones, and specifically Edmonton and Calgary, who meet certain qualifications at the present time, to be eligible as of that July 1st date?
Mr. Speaker, that is, of course, part of the process that is spelled out at the present time, and it is the intention of this government to make sure, and working with the members of Parliament for Alberta, to make sure that the federal government recognizes what is actually taking place in this province throughout the entire province. Specific recognition, of course, of what has taken place in Edmonton and Calgary, in the construction industry primarily in Edmonton, and of course in the energy industry in Calgary, have to be taken into consideration. And that, we would hope, might even be addressed sooner than the regular negotiation, which is called for in the legislation by the federal government in their Western Initiatives program.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Honourable Minister. It's my understanding that because Alberta was not eligible, and specifically Calgary was not eligible for the DRE grants, that this affected our opportunity of receiving some of the investments of Orlikon Aerospace in our province. Could the Minister confirm that? And if that is so, was the Minister involved in any of those discussions at that time?
Mr. Speaker, that particular matter, my colleague, the Minister of Economic Development and Trade, might wish to comment upon. The fact of the matter is, of course, that under the what is called the IRDP, Industrial Regional Development Program, we are not entitled to receive some of the grants, and that is, as I say, very unfortunate, because they are based on what was rather than what is the real situation in Alberta today. But my colleague may wish to supplement my answer.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member raised the issue of the tiered grant system, the IRDP, as opposed to the ERDA system, which we have a number of sub-agreements in Alberta on tourism and nutritive processing and northern development, and those have been successful for Alberta, but the tiered IRDP funding has not been available. As the Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs indicated, this has been a high priority for us in terms of affecting changes in the DRI guidelines. To that end, I raised the issue at the last federal provincial ministerial meeting of economic development, and Mr. Cote, the federal minister, agreed, as did the other provinces, that this would be the topic at our next meeting, an entire and complete review of the tiered system of funding. And our proposal was that it be changed in order to respond more effectively to the needs of Western Canada. Now, with respect to the specific question of whether or not the inability of Albertans to access IRDP had an impact on the awarding of a contract in Calgary through Orlikon, my colleague, the Minister of Technology, may wish to add.
Thank you. Leader of the Liberal Party, supplementary. Final supplementary, Leader of the Representative Party.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to either minister that has just responded, could the Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs, will it be the intention of the government to press for all 15 or all 15 zones in Alberta to qualify for these Tier 2 grant opportunities?
Well, I think my colleague has already indicated that it is he's already made representations to have a complete review of the desirability of a tiered system at all. That is certainly something that we will have to examine. But within Alberta, as I have said, it is our intention to press to have the federal government recognize the realities that exist in Alberta today and not base this program on what existed when the energy industry was booming and when and before the agricultural sector of our economy was so hard hit by falling international commodity prices.
Member Westlock Sturgeon, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister, in view of the fact I'm sure he knows that Quebec received $489 million in last report, and we received only $13 million for the two zones you mentioned. I'm sure the Minister must have a fallback position, and if the federal government will not accept the idea that all of Alberta is a depressed area because of the recent re-election of your government, what's your fallback position? Would you share with the House what areas of the 15 zones that you are asking to be named acceptable for the DRE grants?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the representations which have already been made, which we will continue to advance to the federal government, will, we believe, if they are reasonable people, they have to be, they're Canadians after all. They have to recognize the realities that exist in Alberta today, and that's what we will be asking them to do. So the Honourable Leader of the Liberals Party's supplementary question is hypothetical. We would hope and expect the federal government to respond satisfactorily to our representations.
Leader of the Opposition.
One of the other realities, if I may bring to the Minister, is that, as Mr. Wilson said, 96% of the jobs in Canada in the last year were created in Ontario, and we find out that they got also the bulk of the DRE grants. My question to the Minister, has that specific point been made clearly to the federal government that that is unfair?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and the fact that the Minister of Finance has seen fit to publicly acknowledge the fact certainly has brought home to me that they understand the realities. Now it's up to them to act upon the realities. Well, Mr. Speaker, the fact of if the Leader of the Opposition wants to hear my reply, I would ask him to give me the courtesy of listening. Now, that representation has been made. The Minister of Finance has made certain statements, but by the Minister that Mr. Coty, Doctor, I was going to I jumped ahead on this subject. I was going to say Dr. Mazinkowski, but I don't think he's received an honorary degree as yet. The Deputy Prime Minister is going to be dealing with this matter. We are convinced in the Western Initiatives paper, and I think that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition and the government are anxiously awaiting federal action on that promised event. We look forward to it.
Order. Honourable members, the difficulty of having to throw comments back and forth in the middle of an answer or a question does indeed lead us further and further in terms of debate, and perhaps that can hold till a later time. It's all right to be making the points, but it does tend to add length of time usage. The chair recognizes the member for Calgary Fish Creek, followed by the member for Edmonton Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question, Mr. Speaker, today is to the provincial treasurer. I recognize that he'll not be bringing down his budget for a few days yet, but as has already been mentioned in the Assembly today, several ministers of the Crown have indicated their deficit reduction intentions with a magnitude of 3%. 3 or 4 ministers have made these announcements, and they can currently impact on the families of who have handicapped children. And a number of these families have asked me to ask the provincial treasurer Can he assure the House that these various deficit-cutting measures and intentions will be coordinated? In effect, will the deficit-cutting left hand be aware of what the deficit-cutting right hand is doing?
Mr. Speaker, let me begin by saying that this government is a caring government. And it is well known, Mr. Speaker, that this government has achieved the highest level of services provided to the people of Alberta over the past decade, and that record is clear. And it is understood, Mr. Speaker, that when this government forms the next fiscal plan, which you will all be seeing in the next 2 weeks from today, that in fact there will be both that empathy that I talk about, that clear understanding that this province does care about those people who are less fortunate than others. And I can moreover assure, Mr. Speaker, that wherever possible, through the contributions and the hard work of my colleagues who have been on their feet already today, that these objectives will be reflected in the priorities of that budget. And so, Mr. Speaker, clearly to not only the members of Fish Creek, as the member has raised, but to others, and not just on the specifics of disabled people in this province, it is clear to all Albertans that our record is clear, that our priorities have been set previously, and I can give a general assurance that set of priorities, that empathy, that feeling will be continued in this budget.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if I could ask a supplementary of the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care. These families that I have referred to in my first question have children who benefit significantly from services at the Alberta Children's Hospital. They have obtained information from various sources that their children and those services will bear a disproportionate share of the sacrifices being made. I understand that he met yesterday with the board of the Children's Hospital. Can he advise us of the progress of that?
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, we have a rather unique situation in Calgary with the Alberta Children's Hospital providing a lot of services to handicapped children and other less fortunate children that is rather unique to that area, in that in other parts of the province such services are provided either through the local health unit or through the education system. An example would be the speech therapists, which all operate really out of the Children's Hospital. So we're mindful of the need for a coordination between the Honourable Minister of Education, the Honourable Minister of Community and Occupational Health, the Minister of Social Services, and myself to ensure that deep cuts in the area of concern in the Children's Hospital don't impact unfairly on children in the school system or children that would be served by health units in other parts of the province. So that was the subject, Mr. Speaker, of the discussions I had yesterday with the acting chairman and one board member of the Calgary Children's Hospital. We had a very good discussion about the various ways in which the hospital is trying to achieve the necessary budget reductions. The board is meeting again this week and on Monday, and will be discussing with me on Tuesday morning. If the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is not interested in the welfare of children, then I'd be prepared to say no. Mr. Speaker, they will be meeting on Monday, and I expect to be meeting or talking with board members on Tuesday of next week, and hopefully we can come to a final conclusion on the services provided by the Children's Hospital in Calgary that will not impact in any unfair way on those less fortunate people.
My final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, could the Minister of Education indicate whether she's prepared to take any action with respect to the Calgary Public School Board and the information now circulating in the community that learning disabled teachers and other specialists in special education will be carrying their disproportionate share of the sacrifices being asked?
Mr. Speaker, there are really two steps to the process involved here. In January, I announced the budget reduction plan which will be proposed to this legislature and its effect on school boards in particular. One of the grants that flows to school boards from my department is the grants for special education. And because of the priority of special education and the very marvelous leaps we have made in terms of treating some special education needs in this province over the past decade, those grants will remain at a constant level between 86-87 and 87-88. The second step to which the honourable member refers is that of the actual board working out its own budget. There are some very important yet difficult decisions which are being made right now in by school boards across this province. And that is really the primary reason why this government decided to give those boards a full 9 months to measure the impact on their communities of the reduction plan. With respect to the specific question about how the disabled will be dealt with within the priorities which the Calgary School Board will set, is one which I know that board is concerned about and is addressing. Certainly we will keep an eye on it, as the Honourable Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care mentioned, in terms of coordinating the effect on a particular service area within the province and in particular in Calgary.
Supplementary question, Edmonton Goldbar.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Social Services, in instituting means testing, Madam Minister, will the government in any way alter the conditions that must currently be met for the disabled to receive assistance, particularly in handicapped children's services?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member began her question with a supposition, and that was that there would be means testing with respect to some of these programs. And it is not my intention, although I will be asking parents to help me provide information to the federal government which will allow better cost sharing between the federal government and the province. It will not be on a formalized basis. And I can assure the honourable member that it is my intention to propose to this Assembly maintenance of the handicapped children's program budget, and I believe that with the help of the parents across the province, we can see that it is delivered on a very equitable basis.
Member for Edmonton Belmont, followed by the member for Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are directed to the Premier. Thus far, this fiscal year, the government has laid off some 170 people or more, and has cancelled or abolished a total of more than 1,300 permanent, temporary, or contract positions. And this at a time when unemployment is running at an intolerable 11.5% rate and growing. Can the Premier advise the Assembly when it became government policy to deliberately worsen the unemployment situation in Alberta?
It never has been and it never will be, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Given that the cuts in government grants to local authorities have forced the layoffs and firings of literally thousands of other Albertans, can the Premier advise what considerations led to the government to force the policy of creating further unemployment onto local governments in our province?
Mr. Speaker, it's been traditional, I guess, in governments in North America that every year, every government increases its spending over the year before, whether or not they have the funds to do it. And they layer on the back of taxpayers debt if they don't have the funds. Mr. Speaker, we are not going to allow that to happen in Alberta, as it has happened at the federal level, where there have been governments of the Liberal Party supported by the NDP. We are not going to allow that to happen in Alberta, Mr. Speaker. We are still providing more funds than any jurisdiction in Canada. And we're asking the people of Alberta to work with a few less dollars, 3%, and be more efficient and provide the services. Now, the people of Alberta understand that, Mr. Speaker. And I must say, Mr. Speaker, with some of the foolish questions, the lights must have been off in the offices over there.
That's right. Mr. Speaker,
You're the one with the blinkers on.
I'm well aware that we're not going to have a committee, but I'm sure as hell hope we're going to get some answers out of you. However,
Honourable member, watch the language, please. Carry on.
Mr. Speaker, can the Premier then name the economic theory to which this government subscribed, which holds that higher unemployment is good for the economy?
Our economic theory, Mr. Speaker, is personal freedom and individual initiative, and not state control and socialism as advocated by the member's office.
Kittens are active. Final supplementary, then. Can the Premier offer any statement to the Assembly at this time which might give the current and soon-to-be unemployed Albertans the slightest reason to believe that this government has any concern for their plight and their problems?
Mr. Speaker, it's a repeat of an earlier question. However, I'm prepared to answer it again. The government of Alberta is doing everything possible to protect Albertans against the international factors